Hi, I'm May Tramada. I'm from the upcoming. It's a pleasure to speak to you today, and condolences on your mother as well. I would just like to ask, first of all, if for anybody who hasn't seen this film, can you give us like a brief introduction into it?
The film is about a middle-aged gay writer called Edward, who's living with and caring for his elderly mother who's recovering from a stroke, Alma, played by Fionnuala Flanagan. At the start of the story, they're sort of stuck in this sort of small house with one another, frustrated, exhausted, and then pretty quickly there's a weekend where Edward becomes responsible for three other elderly mothers, that of his best friends who have absconded to Maspalomas for the weekend. And so he's got, in the tiny house, four very demanding women who refuse to talk to one another, and he's trying to meet their needs over this insane weekend. He's also trying to have this conversation with his mum about how he needs her to move into a care home because he's supposed to go to America to accept a book tour. So that secret is sort of bubbling along the surface the whole way through the story, and you know that it's going to, at some point, it's going to explode.
Working and writing creatively with your brother, you guys worked on this together. What was the experience like? What were the ups and downs? And how do you think that familial connection elevated this film and the themes within it?
Well, obviously, because it's about our mum, it's always really easy for us to work together as writers and stuff. So, and because this was deeply personal to both of us, it was really, we outlined it together, then I'd write a little bit, pass it on to Colin, he'd write a little bit more, pass it on to me, and we just bounced the master draft back and forth all the time. But it was really easy because we have this sort of shared brain situation when we're writing where we've never had an argument over a scene or over a piece of text. It's very fluid between the two of us. Always has been.
And my last question is, with Mother's Day coming up, this is a very timely release. I just want to ask, what are the main takeaways you want people to take from this film whenever they go out and see it, and navigating those very difficult relationships?
I mean, we really just want people to be thinking about hanging out. It's the perfect opportunity to bring your mum to the cinema to have sort of an experience together. We want people to think about getting older. We want people to think about the role of the caregiver and the role of being the person that needs the care, because we're all going to live in that experience at some point in our lives, and it's not something I think that you get to see reflected in movies or TV very often. So that was sort of what we wanted to do. Well, at the time that Jack had sent the DVD, we were sort of living a version of the film. Our mum was unwell at the time, and we were both back home living with her and sort of alternating as carers. So it just sort of struck us. We found it really, really funny and really moving. The original film, Mid-August Lunch, and we just thought there's something that we'd really like to do with this, and we didn't want to adapt. Or we didn't want to recreate the original film because that was so beautiful and it's very much its own thing, but we thought as a sort of a springboard to bring the experiences that we were having at that time, we could do something interesting with it, and that's kind of how it started. Yeah, that was. I mean, when Mum was unwell, one of the things that happened was that she lost her voice and she was needing to communicate with an iPad. My mum was one of the great talkers, so it was pretty devastating when that happened. So the iPad just became this symbol of that we really hated and that we wanted to get revenge on. So as soon as we sort of started working on the film, one of the first things that we decided was that we would use the iPad as the iPad would be central to the film, and it would be, we would be able to use it to comic effect and stuff. At the same time that our mum was unwell, we were also going through a period where we had to promote. Our first film had just come out and we needed to do a lot of press for it, and we were terrible at it. It was the first time we'd had to speak about anything that we'd ever made before, and so it became this nerve-wracking thing every time we'd have to get on a phone with a radio station in America and talk about the film coming out and stuff. And so all of that stuff just became grist for the mill when we were writing For Mothers. All the casting was across Zoom. It took about maybe 6 or 8 months, and we met them all on Zoom. Often had conversations. I remember we met Fionnuala in person. Yeah. She was I think the only actor that we got to meet in person at the time. And then everybody else we just met across Zoom and sort of cast that way. And it was sort of difficult, but one of the weird things about casting now is that so much of it has moved to the online space now. The idea of meeting people in person and having like formal castings seems to be a thing of the past. So it's one of those strange after effects from COVID that's sort of still hung around and stuff. But yeah, I think the first time that we met all the cast in person was like the weekend before we started filming. One of the Martin Parr photography from the 80s and 90s was a big sort of touchstone for us. Like we had some of the photographic books that he had. We gave them to Lucy von Lunkhausen, who was our production designer, and had a lot of conversations about the detail of those photo books. And just in terms of design, that was the place we worked out from. And we wanted everything in the house to be from the 90s. We didn't want anything that was recent. Everything needed to be sort of old and have that feeling of being lived in. So that was sort of key to it. What are the thematic things? When it came to shooting the film, we wanted to shoot in a sort of predominantly in a sort of shallow depth of focus, because there's something about the long lens and there's something about that shallow depth of focus that pulls the actors sort of out of the environment and makes the frame feel quite lonely.
Yeah.
And so that was something that we wanted to, hang on to. I mean, loneliness is sort of central to all of the stories that me and Colin tell, from the feature films and the short films that we've done. Shooting with that shallow depth of field really gives you that sense of loneliness. It really sort of pulls the character out and connect with them on that level intimately in a much deeper way, I feel, than when it's a sort of a wider depth of field.